George Miller has returned to the world of Mad Max, and there's only one question that fans have for him.
Do you have it in you to make it epic?
Let's find out. Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind Reviews. In this video we return to the post-apocalyptic Wasteland in Furiosa and Mad Max Saga. Released in 2024, the spin-off from the Mad Max series tells the origin story of renegade warrior Furiosa before her encounter and team-up with Mad Max in Fury Road. Once again directed by George Miller, who also co-writes alongside Nick Latheris, the film stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Chris Hemsworth, Tom Burke, Alila Brown, George Shevstov, Lacey Hulme, Nathan Jones, Josh Hellman and Charlie Fraser. Furiosa, excuse the pun, has had a long road towards being released, with the script for this movie actually being completed by George Miller before he even started filming Fury Road. And the reason for it is simply because they wanted to explain who it was that Furiosa was and where she comes from. So when Mad Max Fury Road was released, pretty much became a smash hit, dominating the film festival circuit, getting 5-star reviews across the board and got hailed as one of the greatest action movies ever made. All of that, apart from what happened with the box office, pretty much guaranteed that Furiosa was going to get made. And now it's finally here for the world to see. Furiosa is a revenge story that follows a younger Furiosa as she's taken from her family and home by a gang led by the quite aptly named Dementus, who is stirring up trouble across the harsh wastelands. The film, spanning about 15 years or so, follows Furiosa as she tries to navigate her way to survival and ultimately both find her way home and exact her revenge. So it probably comes as no surprise that the movie is quite long, running at about 2 hours 28 minutes. And while that does sound a little bit long, especially compared to all the previous movies, which never went past 2 hours as far as I'm aware, it's quite similar to recent movies like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, where you do feel the runtime. It does feel like it is 2.5 hours long, but at the same time, it is justified. It's not a movie that feels like it needs to be trimmed down or edited in some way. It's a movie where everything that does happen needs to happen and everything does feel important. Plus, there is a lot happening in this movie. I mean, the trailers refer to this film as an odyssey for a reason. Not only does it dive into Furiosa's backstory and seeing her develop into the character that we know from Fury Road, there's a lot of excellent world building and we see the foundations for a lot of key elements that will eventually come into play. Plus, the introduction of Dementus and his gang and how they fit into this story. That being said, it does feel like there are some elements in this movie that do feel like they've either been skimmed over or missing. I don't know how many deleted scenes there actually could be in this movie, but I reckon that the story for this film could go over well over the 3-hour mark. Maybe even more. I've seen a lot of people online talking about this movie and saying that it could have potentially been a 6-part miniseries. And I don't disagree with that. Furiosa is a bit like movies like Zack Snyder's Justice League and A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where the movie is broken up into chapters with text appearing on screen in between each segment. So it is doable. I mean, you'd miss out on the big screen experience, which I would recommend, by the way. But, as I said, I do think that it would work as a TV series. But all that being said, it is a decent story that is told well. It gives the characters enough time to breathe, it uses its world building really well and effectively, and it's all executed really well. For the characters and the performances, there are some really talented actors that are involved in this. All of them are doing a fantastic job, they are all giving their all, and leading things as Furiosa is Anya Taylor-Joy. Anya Taylor-Joy was actually quite an interesting choice to lead this movie, at least for me, because I've never really seen her do an action-oriented role before, unless things like The New Mutants counts. But I thought she was absolutely fantastic overall. It's a very nuanced performance that Anya gives for this, but she more than delivers during the bigger and dramatic moments. She really throws herself into this role, especially during the action sequences, which, by all accounts, she did a fair amount of herself. It's really cool seeing how involved she was and how her physical performance is as well. The physical stuff, the way that she communicates and emotes through her movements or just her eyes, is excellent, and it's a real benefit having an actress involved like Anya Taylor-Joy who can do that, because Furiosa, for the most part, is pretty silent throughout this movie. She has, according to reports, about 30 lines of dialogue throughout the entire runtime. Just to reiterate, the film is 2.5 hours long, but she really makes the most of it, and I genuinely thought that she was absolutely brilliant overall. What really surprised me about this was actually how far through the movie it was before Anya Taylor-Joy actually shows up as Furiosa, because a good chunk of the first act of this movie follows Furiosa when she's a child, and this version of Furiosa is played by Alila Brown. Alila's Furiosa does a lot of the heavy lifting, as most of the big and pretty traumatic events within her life happen when she's young. And I think Alila is excellent overall and keeps her performance believable. Both eras of this story help flesh Furiosa out really well, and it does add a lot more to her character. But as great as Anya and Alila are throughout this movie, by far the most entertaining character and my favourite part of this entire film is Dementus, played by Chris Hemsworth. He just chews up the scenery in this with a very exaggerated accent and mannerisms, and I think the name Dementus is probably the most fitting name that he could possibly have. He's a power-hungry survivor who is, yeah, I'll agree with Chris Hemsworth, a horrible individual that commits some pretty violent and sadistic acts. Chris Hemsworth is so much fun in this and gets to add a few speckles of humour, but that's only earlier on in the film. But I like his descent into madness throughout this movie, the way that it's handled. And the way that his costume choices, the cape that he wears, is a real subtle indicator about what's actually happening to him, because over the course of the film, it's becoming a lot darker and it's starting to decay, and I think that that is really clever and subtle. We don't necessarily see that evolution, but we are shown enough to understand what's happening, and he is still interesting. I really enjoyed this character. Chris Hemsworth is clearly having a load of fun with this role. Dementus as a character is the perfect contrast to Furiosa, and for this movie, he is a fantastic antagonist. He is a load of fun, and as I said, he is easily my favourite character in this. I also really like Tom Burke in this movie as a character called Praetorian Jack. I didn't know that Tom Burke was in this, so I was quite pleased when he showed up, because I do think that he is a really decent actor, and I've liked him in pretty much every single role that I have seen him in, and it's no different here. I really like the character overall, how he fits into the story, and the relationship and partnership that he develops with Furiosa, especially since he is basically the only nice person that she meets who actually wants to help her. Tom's performance was really good overall, the character was cool, even if we don't know too much about him, and I liked how he's used within the overall story. And that pretty much goes for every single character that is in this movie, because every single character that does appear, it does feel like there is an actual reason for them to be in it. Especially the returning characters from Fury Road, with performances from Lacey Hulme as Immortan Joe, Nathan Jones as Rictus Erectus, and Josh Hellman as Scrotus. I didn't actually know that those were their names. Plus, a few of the new additions, including Charlie Fraser as Mary Jabassa, who has a large role early on, and Charlie does do some really decent work and keeps your attention. I think that everyone does do a decent job throughout this movie, both returning and new, and I think that everyone is giving a really decent performance overall. This is an action movie first and foremost, and that is one aspect of this movie that I was really looking forward to seeing, and it did not disappoint. The majority of Furiosa is a mixture of shootouts and chase sequences, and while I don't think that this is as action-packed as Fury Road was, it's all handled really well. It's kind of mad me actually saying that this movie isn't as action-packed, because one of the reasons why it is that a lot of the characters don't really talk that much, especially Furiosa, is because according to George Miller, the director, is that talking and dialogue gets in the way of the action. I'm kind of split on that idea, to be honest, because to me it depends on what kind of action movie that it is. In some instances, I do think that some movies do work a little bit better if they do have a little bit of dialogue to break up some of the bigger set pieces, especially when it needs to focus on the characters themselves. But then in other instances, I do think that some other movies, it works so much better when you let the action do all the speaking for them. For this one, I do think that it does work overall. I think that there is a good balance of both dialogue-heavy sequences and action sequences, and I'm happy that they focus on the important stuff that needs to be said or the important stuff that needs to happen. The choreography and staging of each sequence is really good. There's some really fun and crazy chases, and I love how imaginative the film can be, especially for the stunt work. There's some insane shots and camera movements in this, and there's even some long takes that I genuinely have no idea how they did. There are some visual effects that are used throughout this, and while there are some things that do look pretty good because it does rely on being practical, they're not always the best. It's not jarring, and I don't think that it will take you out of the experience, but I do think that in some sequences, especially one big chase sequence, it is kind of noticeable. That being said, when it comes to the backgrounds and the environments that these characters are in, the effects that are used in those sequences, they're pretty good. It blurs together with the real set and locations pretty well, especially with this art style, and it is often difficult to tell how much is real and how much isn't. The designs are pretty good. I love how everything looks, including the costumes, and because everything has this really sort of dirty and dingy look with lots of little details and things in the background, it does help make this world feel much more lived in, with lots of history. All of that stuff looks fantastic. Overall, it's a visually dazzling film that makes full use of the cinematography from Simon Duggan, who conjures up some fantastic looking imagery. And I've always loved, especially what it is that they did with Fury Road and now this movie, is how bright and colourful this post-apocalyptic wasteland is. It's such a contrast to what we normally see with this kind of setting, especially in these kind of movies, and I love that creative decision. I love the overall look and design of this film. There's definitely some room for improvement, but more so when it comes to the actual effects that are used throughout this movie. But overall, I do think that the overall design and look of this movie is absolutely brilliant. And the same goes for the overall sound design, which sounded absolutely amazing, especially on the big screen. It's detailed and atmospheric, and it helps you get immersed in the world of the Wastelands. And as for the soundtrack from returning composer Tom Holkenborg, I have mixed feelings on. It is good overall, it really suits this movie, and it highlights the tense moments really well. That being said, I don't think that it's the most memorable. It's a very bass-oriented soundtrack, mixing together low atmospheric sounding tones and a primal drum beat that matches the world and characters well. But that being said, and even though it does feature a few snippets of soundtrack from the Fury Road soundtrack, there's no real theme as such, and there's no hook that makes you remember it in the same way that Tom Holkenborg did with the soundtrack for Mad Max Fury Road. I may not have the best memory when it comes to Mad Max Fury Road because the last time I saw the movie was years ago, but I do still remember that theme. I can't say the same for this. That being said, it is suitable for what it is, it amplifies the intensity really well, and it does work overall. Overall, I thought this was a great movie, a decent origin story, and a good addition to the Mad Max franchise. It isn't a perfect movie by any means, with a sometimes slow pace, elements feeling skimmed or brushed over, some effects needing a bit of a touch-up, and a soundtrack that isn't the most memorable. That being said, the story is really good and told well, especially considering just how much it needs to address. The characters are fun, interesting, and performed by the actors very well. Anya Taylor-Joy was brilliant, and as I said, Chris Hemsworth was a proper standout. The cinematography, the set design, the costumes and editing, and the sound design is really good. The soundtrack, as I said, isn't the most memorable, but it does fit and it does heighten the tension. The action, stunts, and set pieces are expertly choreographed, imaginative, and creative in equal measure, with some brilliant sequences and ideas. I think this is a great big screen experience. I liked it for what it was. I would definitely recommend checking this out if you can, especially at the cinema. That being said, I don't think that everyone will enjoy this. The reactions for it online have been kind of split overall, so I can't guarantee that you'll enjoy this as much as others, but I would still say to give it a go. I really liked it, it was a good movie overall, and I'm glad I got the chance to see this. So with all that being said, my rating for Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, is an 8 out of 10. To be honest, I'm not in any rush to rewatch this movie, but I am glad that I did get the chance to see it, and I'm happy that I did get to see this on the big screen. At this point in time, whether or not we see more from this franchise in the future remains to be seen, but if more is on the way, then I hope that the quality remains the same. We will see. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for sticking around. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. If you have seen Furiosa, let me know down in the comments what you think about it and which movie in the Mad Max franchise is your favourite. And if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews or recommendations you would like to see me do, let me know down below. I'm also going to have to very quickly apologise for the lighting looking a little bit all over the place in this video, because the ring light that I usually use for these videos has unfortunately died and I don't have a backup, so I'm basically using sunlight at this point in time. Luckily it's quite bright outside and it doesn't look too bad right now, but I do need a replacement, so I'm going to look into doing that as soon as possible. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. See you guys.